the newspapers aren't gonna print the truths. They're not gonna print the actual type of crimes that are going out here. Come running out for a day to film a day in the life of a cop or a day in the life of a high crime precinct. Bullshit. That's all it is. Total bullshit. You can't do it because it's just like a flowing river and all the garbage is coming down through it. And you just couldn't do it in a day or in 2 days. You know, you have to come out here and sit around and then the cops are told, you don't talk to anybody, you don't say nothing to anybody, you got to keep everything quiet. Baloney, you can't do that. You got to get out there and you got to speak and you got to say, this is what's going down, and this is what happens when you go to court. And this is how ridiculous it looks when you get out of court, you come walking back, and here's a guy you just arrested for robbery standing on the corner. And the judges let him out.
But you can't classify us as soldiers, or as you say, mercenaries, because we're getting paid for what we do. Because again, we're not out there fighting anything other than crime. A soldier and a mercenary doesn't try to protect anybody but themselves. And they fight for X number of feet or yards of ground. All we're trying to do is keep society safe from the animals that are out here.
Well, let's put it this way. They can intimidate some policemen out here, okay?
And they do, correct?
And they most certainly do. They most certainly do. But then again, if they come up against me and my partner and they start any of that crap, I would think nothing of knocking them right on their back. You know.
You look at the average policeman, and he comes from the lower middle class or upper lower class, and suddenly he's going to become a policeman. He wants security, he wants a nice paying job, he wants to work out of doors, he wants to help people. He is going to don this uniform, and he is going to go out into the streets of our city, and he is going to help people. And that is the psychology. And he goes to the police academy, and he is told that he's going to be helping people, and he is taught how to help people. He's going to be preserving the fabric of our society, preserving life and property, maintaining the peace, and doing all noble purposes. And then he gets out there, and he suddenly discovers that he's regulating human behavior, that he is bitterly resented, and he's shocked. Police officer's reaction to this is absolute shock, that a citizen, and I mean the citizen generically, should resent his presence, and he does, and it is resented, and it is resented rightly. We all bridle at control. The policeman has great difficulty assimilating this knowledge. He becomes a bit cynical, he becomes a bit hardened. He cannot permit every emotional contact to drain him. He has to have emotions for his life and for his family. So like the prostitute that cannot afford to become emotionally, romantically involved with every client, the policeman cannot afford to become emotionally or romantically involved with every client. And the result is that he develops calluses over his emotions. As a matter of fact, that hardness and that cynicism permits him to cope with what he encounters. I think that if you maintain the involvement of the philosopher in the ghetto and a policeman, I think he'd disintegrate after a very little while.
But do you think that there are degrees to which policemen become hardened that perhaps go over into another area where they begin to have negative
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is reflected in names like Fort Apache. Here we are surrounded by a bunch of hostiles. We are an island of heroes and a sea of hostility. It is us and them. There are all a bunch of animals out there. The insularity grows, the parochialism grows, and they become an island. So we have the outside world and we have the police world, and we experience our reality, and the real world experiences its reality, and it is terribly difficult for any citizen to understand the complexities involved in police work. The policeman fundamentally has a ringside seat on the greatest show on earth. One of the beautiful things about being a policeman is that you're at the center of action all the time. You are seeing people, sometimes even famous people, in the most incredible circumstances. You're in on every secret of society, in a sense. And that's very exciting. The public doesn't understand everything that you see. You cannot even explain it. Most policemen have a tighter relationship with their partners than they do with their wives, which is a whole different situation. So the insularity grows, the secretiveness grows, the parochialism grows. Society doesn't understand the policeman's role. The policeman is shocked to discover that society doesn't appreciate him sufficiently, and they are driven apart. And this really creates a kind of ineluctable drift that I don't know how to combat. Just as in Clockwork Orange, a dehumanized and impersonal society is brutalizing and conditioning its citizens, so do we have poverty, the lack of education, the inability to articulate, alcoholism, unemployment, inadequate housing, and all of the desperate conditions of the ghetto, fundamentally conditioning our citizens in that ghetto to resolve their disputes violently. We have a subculture in our society, and it resides in the ghetto, and we are conditioning this subculture, and their reaction is very predictable. B.F. Skinner would have no difficulty identifying what is happening there. We are conditioning people to fail. We are conditioning people to become alcoholics. We are conditioning them to be violent, and we give them no other mechanisms with which to cope. So there is nothing inevitable about it. It is a process that is taking place because of forces that are conditioning this response, just as forces are conditioning my response to educate my children effectively, make sure they're getting a good education, I pay my mortgage, pay my taxes, I resolve my disputes with my wife orally or with my colleagues through communications. In the ghetto, I'd be stabbing and punching and kicking and doing and scratching and doing everything else that everybody else is doing, simply because I'm a human being, and I'm conditionable, and they're conditionable.
But so often the violence stems from such a trifling matter. You know, somebody neglected to return something they borrowed, and the person decided to go shoot the...
Sure. The levels of rage and frustration have created an emotional gorge that people are permanently endowed with in the ghetto. So, whereas it may take quite a while for me to get you angry enough to be violent, and if you were walking around with an emotional gorge up to here, it would only take another fraction of an inch to get you to respond. And that's really what is happening. The frustrations that I'm talking about, the heat, the misery, the lack of rest, the whole miserable condition of poverty. And Aristotle did say 2,500 years ago that poverty is the parent of revolution and crime. It is still true. And when you're going around with that gorge and those levels of frustration and permanent anger, and you don't even know at what, the first available target becomes the focus of the violence. America attacks the problems that it sees. It doesn't see these problems. They are now under the rug. The fact is that we have ignored them. The poor are being more ignored now than they ever have been. They are poorer than they ever have been. There hasn't been a significant redistribution of income in this nation for 30 years. The bureaucracy and the government are failing. And fundamentally, the federal government has simply got to look at what is happening in the inner city ghetto and address it. And one of the reasons it hasn't done so is because it has been invisible. No one is filming it, no one is writing about it, no one is doing stories about it. It is just invisible. If you go out into the streets of the Bronx, you'll see a lot of black and Hispanic, energetic young men and women all dressed up, no place to go, nothing to do, no jobs, no point in living, and seeking any form of escape that they can find, whether that form is drugs or alcohol or whatever. Most frequently it's alcohol, and thank God that it's so freely available. To the degree that I succeed in keeping it cool, and keeping the ghetto cool, to the degree that I can be effective, to that degree fundamentally am I deflecting America's attention from discovering this cancer. And the longer it is deferred, the discovery, as in Vietnam, the greater the moral dilemma and the greater the moral problem when it is ultimately discovered. So maybe I would be better off failing. Maybe I'd be better off not working quite as hard. Maybe I'd be better off not being as effective as I presume myself to be. And that way America would be confronting the problem as it had to do during the urban riots of the 60s, and so on. The fact of the matter is that we are manufacturing criminals, we are manufacturing brutality out there, we are very efficiently creating a very volatile and dangerous sub-element of our society, and we are doing it simply because we don't want to face the burdens and the problems and the responsibilities that their existence imposes upon any society with conscience. So rather than awaken your conscience to the problem, you're far better off just ignoring it. And that's what we are doing. And I am very well paid. almost to be the commander of an army of occupation in the ghetto. And that is a great tragedy, I think, and I don't know that anyone's useful life ought to be employed in that kind of a pursuit, however well paid one is. So that's where my sense of defeat and frustration come from.